Lightning streaked overhead, splitting the darkened sky in two. A few seconds later, the deep growl of thunder sounded so loud I could feel the vibrations in my bones. Peering over the steering wheel to look up at the sky, I silently wished the rain would hold off at least for a little while. But I wasn't so lucky. Shortly after, droplets of water began to pepper my windshield like a fine mist. I turned on my wipers, and was met with the shrillest of squeaks as they jerked left and right. A few seconds later, the mist turned into a river of water falling from the sky. Even with my windshield wipers going at full speed, they simply couldn't handle the amount of rain falling down. I strained my eyes to make sure I was still within the lines on the road. Driving in this weather was a poor decision. No pun intended. I slowed down a bit, not wanting to lose control. Then, as if they appeared out of nowhere, multiple figures stood on the road. My headlights flashed over them briefly, but I still couldn't see them through my windshield. I only managed a glimpse of something physical, standing in the road. That was enough for me to jerk the wheel over, and my car spun wildly on the slick asphalt. I bounced off the main road and rolled my car into a muddy ditch, which was becoming muddier by the second. About a week ago, my friends all decided to rent a cabin for the weekend. It was something we always talked about doing. Grabbing a few kegs, some marshmallows, enough food to satisfy a football team, and to have a relaxing time with nature. My friends and I all talked about doing this for years, but someone either couldn't get the time off or would simply flake at the last minute, and the plans would be called off. We finally managed to agree on a time and place, and after all the deposits were accounted for, it was settled. You had to put in a deposit to rent the cabin for a certain amount of time, and once you paid, you had to go or else you lost out on some money. It was a good incentive not to bow out at the last minute. The cabin was located a ways away from my house, up in the northern mountain range. It was about an hour-and-a-half drive. I tried my best to get off work early enough to make the drive, but I only managed to shave an hour off. I left work around 5 p.m. and by the time I made it home and packed everything up, I was leaving at around 6:30. One of my friends, the one who was orchestrating the whole get-together, was already at the cabin setting up. He phoned me asking what was taking so long. I told him I had to work late but was on my way. I was about halfway through the drive when the lightning split the sky. The road I was on was a narrow, empty road. It had been about 20 minutes since I had last seen another car on the road with me. On one side of the road were trees for as far as the eye could see. The other side was a vast field stretching into farmland farther out. The smoke trailing from under the hood of my car seemed to cut through the rain that fell onto it. Feeling something warm running down the side of my face, I lifted my hand to my head. My arm was stiff and difficult to move, and it throbbed with pain as I gingerly brought my hand away, revealing blood staining my fingertips. I groaned as I looked out of my driver's side window. The rain cascading down it looked like sheets of melting glass, which didn't help my distorted vision. I coughed before cracking open my door. The grinding metallic sound seemed to echo in my car as I forced the door the rest of the way open. I fell out of my seat onto the muddy ground. My arms and knees seemed to sink further down as I struggled to get my bearings. Using the crumpled mass that used to be my car as a brace, I hoisted myself up to my feet. Rain fell upon me like millions of needles. Every drop seemed to hit a sore spot on my body that sent jolts of pain throughout me. I looked out to the road where I had seen something standing on it. While it was pretty dark out, I couldn't see anything standing there anymore. I thought for a moment that perhaps the rain on my windshield had tricked me. I crawled back into my car to retrieve my phone. Somewhere buried under the bent driver's seat, I found it. I thanked God that it wasn't broken, as the tiny screen illuminated when I touched it. I dialed the police, and after a few rings, I was connected. I told them about the accident, and my rough location. There were no mile markers near me, and as far as I knew, I was in the middle of nowhere. I gave them the road I was on, and they said they would dispatch someone as soon as they could, but it would take some time to reach me since I didn't have a precise location. I hung up and sighed. I tried my best to sit back in the driver's seat, but it was so badly bent I couldn't get all the way back inside with the door closed. As I sat there, rain drenching my exposed legs, I closed my eyes for a moment. A few minutes later, lightning cracked and my eyes shot open. I glanced around, and that's when I saw them. Standing in the empty field a few yards from where my car lay were hundreds of them. All of them stood at different intervals, but they strangely all seemed like the same person, like someone had copied and pasted one person over and over again. I held my breath, thinking maybe, just maybe, they were the emergency services coming to help me. But as they got closer, I quickly realized that wasn't the case. As they moved closer, I got a better look at them. Their red eyes seemed to cut through the night and rain like butter. They were all roughly the same size. Their arms, though, seemed slightly longer than your average man's. Their hands seemed almost dragged near their shins. They were all hunched over, walking together like some bizarre army. They never increased their speed. Each step was methodical and deliberate. I'm not sure why, but every fiber in my body was screaming at me to run. I strained to stand up, leaning on my car as I did so. They were only a yard or two away now. I could see each of them much more clearly. Their skin was all white, but upon closer inspection, it looked like a black sludge or tar was covering their shoulders and chest. I also noticed that they didn't have mouths. It was as if their mouths were completely erased from their heads. Closer they came, before I finally decided it was time to get away from them. Slowly, I limped backwards, when suddenly I heard something behind me. Footsteps squishing in the muddy earth. I quickly spun on my heels, and one of them was face to face with me. It raised its long arm and rested it upon my shoulder. I screamed and fell backwards. Its arm dropped as I fell, swinging back to its place near the ground. Even though my entire body was in pain, I scrambled through the mud to my feet and ran out onto the road. They were all over my car now. I looked up and down the road in a panic. Those creatures seemed to stretch endlessly on all sides of me. I was cornered. They continued to lumber towards me. The rain seemed to grow in intensity as I looked for a way out. I spun around and saw the woods at my back. I scanned the trees carefully for any sign of those things. And after not seeing any, my decision was made. I limped into the tree line, dashing through mud, over stumps, and under branches. I didn't look back, but for some reason I knew they were still there, still following me. My chest burned with each breath I took. My body stopped me as I was in desperate need to catch my breath. Leaning on a tree next to a slight cliff's edge, I looked behind me. I could see thousands of eyes in the tree line. Even though they weren't very fast, they never seemed to stop. They were closing in on me, and I had nowhere else to go. They crept slowly closer to me, encircling me. I wasn't sure what was going to happen if they caught me. Mere inches away from me, they continued advancing. I felt myself instinctively take a step backwards. I fell down the small cliff. My body rolled end over end, until I struck my head on a stump at the bottom. When I awoke, I was being loaded into the back of an ambulance. I had a few cracked ribs, some moderate bruising throughout my entire body, and my right arm was dislocated, not to mention the wound to my head that needed multiple stitches. Lucky to be alive, is what one of the doctors said. And it was true. I was lucky to be alive. but not just because of the car crash. I don't know what those things are, or why they didn't kill me when I fell off that cliff. But ever since that day, whenever the rain falls hard outside, a shiver runs down my spine, and I can vaguely see red eyes glowing in the distance.